Hi, Karen. Welcome to Make It in Brixton.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
We are here today to talk about your exhibition at Block 336. So I thought you could just start by telling us how it came about.
Yeah. Well, I think that's the interesting thing about these things because I did this exhibition in Lewisham Arts House, and that was 2017. And the curator there knew Jane Hayes Greenwood from Block and invited her to the show. So she came along and saw the precariat and, got very interested in my work. And I think since then we've been talking about having an exhibition there. And it's finally happened in 2021.
And you're showing two pieces. You're showing Blue Power and AntiA Woman. Yeah. Could you just introduce those two pieces to us?
Yeah, sure. So AntiA Woman, it's the first piece that you'll encounter as you come in. And I think, again, after doing the show with the Sugar Houses at Lewisham Arts House, my work had taken me really to resistance. And I got really interested in the enslaved woman. So, AntiA Woman platforms the lost histories of enslaved Black women and really speaks about their bodies as sites of oppression. But I also got interested in how they then use their bodies as sites of resistance. So, I think it was 2 years ago, there was so much about women. We were celebrating suffragettes and there was a lot going on. It was the year of the woman. And for some reason, the enslaved woman was missing. Yeah. So, she's been occluded from history. So I decided my work had really just got to that point, and I'd come across this book by Barbara Bush, who had written the book Slave Woman. And she was actually an academic from up here. She had gone to Trinidad for some reason and had realized that the slave woman was everywhere but nowhere. So she came back to England and wrote the book. And she did a lot of research. And around that time as well, you have a lot of Black academics from the United States, like Deborah Gray White, writing about the slave woman as well. Because if you look back at how slavery was written, it was written by men about the male slave, There wasn't anything until recently, and I'm saying 30 years, 40 years ago, written about the woman. And her experience is so different, She was equal to the male slave on the plantation. She was robbed of her femininity. She was raped. She was also a mother, and so that's where it all began. And the research was really very interesting. And it really showed how much these women resisted. First to begin with, they came from different tribes in Africa. So some of the tribes that they belonged to, they actually fought alongside their men, so they were warriors, some of them. In their own right. They were accustomed to fighting. And the interesting thing was they came with this knowledge of plants. And that is what they really used. They used this knowledge of the plants around the plantation to take control of their bodies. They used it to abort their babies. And later on, they used it for infanticide. They used it to poison the masters when they couldn't take any more. So they came with a lot of skills that, the plantation owners weren't ready for. Yeah, so that was a big part of the research, as well as, they were able to Yeah. So the sad thing about it really is that so once they got onto the plantation, once they got off the ship, really, they were bought, they were branded, and they were put on. So whatever plantation they belonged to, the brand would be put either in front of the chest or on the back, sometimes on the face. And they were sent off to these plantations. And very early in the game, I think in the south of America, they realized that when these women had children, this was like gold. This is free labor on my plantation. So that was a big part of their process. But this only kind of, I think the Caribbean plantation owners only kind of caught on to it late in the game. I mean, because when the cost of bringing slaves from Africa became so expensive, there were places like Barbados, and this has been written about in detail by Dr. Hilary Beckers. They went into actually what they called a breeding program. I know. So it's so hard going. So they started to, before it wouldn't matter to them. They would work the women, pregnant as they were, same long hours. They would whip them same way. Nothing stopped, the harshness of their lives, even if they were pregnant. But when it came down to economics, and they realized, my God, it's getting so hard to bring slaves from Africa, so expensive, they started this breeding program, and they actually called it breeding wenches. And they gave them incentives to have babies. So their wombs became like gold, Yeah. So that's what AntiA Woman is about, really. It's about that whole process. It's about the violence experience, but it's also about how they found a way to resist all of this. And it actually, the main aim was to bring attention to them, as it is widely believed that they did not take part in any form of resistance. And this was not true at all.
Yeah.
And also, to celebrate their bravery and their heroism. So I use, and one of the, the iconic bits of imagery around is Nanny from Jamaica. Yeah. So I use Nanny a lot to signify and to, bring out that heroism, because Nanny was the one who really led the Maroon movement, in Jamaica. So Nanny is very, I created a composite image of Nanny. So she features a lot in the work,
That's we've just done another project actually with a very young artist who has featured Nanny in
really.
Piece. So yeah, Nanny is big in our world at the moment, which is really, really good. I mean, What strikes me, Karen, is the complexity of that life experience, which is like so many. So much of the history has been simplified into something which is, just about palatable to a certain audience, I guess.
Yeah.
But the way that you are highlighting the strength, power, value of that femininity, I think, by the harshness of the brand, but with gold, is just an incredibly smushing together powerfulness of value and horror in one thing to make it beautiful. I was completely blown away by that as a fresh symbol of all of that.
I think I started off with the gold, really, to sort of emphasize the money that these plantations were making, the whole commodification of the womb, really.
Yes.
But I spent a lot of time doing the branding, which is pretty tough. I actually got quite emotional talking about it yesterday. And something, that's how these things evolve, because I was actually screen printing gold on one side, and then I was going to the allotment and branding on the other side. And then one violated the other, and there was this beautiful image, or almost saying, I'm going to defy this process, I'm going to defy everything you throw at me. And it just became evident that I had to take these beautiful sacks and even enhance them more, and show that beauty, how our Caribbean women have rose today to be these beautiful beings, through all this hardship, you know what I mean? So it was trying to just kind of capture all of that in the process, So I hope at the end of the day it really does communicate what I wanted to communicate.
Well, it really does communicate. And I similarly felt really touched by it, and but also touching something inside of me. So I think it's finding a point in well, certainly as a woman, it just found a point in me, which was about there is this inner power and the inner resistance. And I also love the bit around the ancestral knowledge and intelligence working through the plants to actually become a different source of power. It's just brilliant.
Yes.
It would change the face of today's allotments, I think, if we could grow some of that stuff.
So that's AntiA Woman. That's an introduction to AntiA Woman. And then Blue Power. Blue Power, I actually went down to do a residency in a small art space we have in Trinidad called AntiA. And it was a very short residency. It was only 2 weeks. Because I think at that time I had been up here for a long stretch, maybe about 4 years, and I felt like I needed to go back and get some raw material, and to feel the culture again and to get in touch with it. So I did this short residency at AntiA, and it's always so strange when you're away for a long. Well, that was 4 years, was a long period of time for me, and then to go back into the society. So one of the things that really impacted on me was, of course, you're up here and you're reading about the crime all the time, and but then going back, I've been living in a secular country for such a long time, and then you go back and everybody in the Caribbean is praying. My whole country seemed to be praying, and they were praying for protection, obviously, because of all of the crime that was surrounding them all the time. And I even went into the fuel station, and in the fuel station they have signs everywhere, kind of making you feel guilty that if you don't pray, something's going to happen to you, So, so, I mean, when you live in it, you get so accustomed to it, but, going back, it's sort of impacted, And I had also been reading Stuart Hall's wife's book, Catherine Hall's book, Civilizing Subjects. And, she was talking a lot about how people from England, from the UK, actually, as slavery was being abolished, the Baptist missionaries actually left here in droves to go down to, especially Jamaica, to civilize the subjects. So that was impacting on me as well. And I got very interested in the syncretic religious practices that we now have in the Caribbean. So, you have Santeria, you have voodoo, we have obia, the Jamaicans have pocamania. I had been to Cuba and had actually experienced, going into a room with a Virgin Mary and a black idol. So always sort of playing on my mind. So I started to do some research into the syncretic religious practices that we have. And that was really interesting because, of course, with the Spaniards sort of colonizing first, you have such a large percentage of Catholics still in the Caribbean. And then when I looked at the syncretic religious practices, they actually maintain still a lot of those Catholic and Anglican religious practices. So they would start their ritual, maybe saying the Our Father or singing, and then they would, go on to it would progress into their African. So that syncretic, thing really, form of prayer and ritual really started to interest me. But other than that, in the Caribbean, we also have a lot of mythology and folklore. So especially I know in Jamaica and Trinidad, this blue soap plays a big part in our lives. This blue carbolic soap that was actually brought to the Caribbean by the English during colonization to wash your hands. I think it was used in the hospitals, to disinfect. And we use it in Trinidad for like almost any ill. If you go through a bad time, they say bathe in blue soap, So the blue soap is really prevalent. And I had gone to Tobago some time ago, and I had a friend who had a restaurant there, and she says, yeah, they put the blue soap over the door. So when you walk in, you're cleansed of all your bad vibes before you come into their house, So, yeah, so I was there and, experiencing all this prayer. But alongside that, every day I'm reading the newspapers and, there are all these horrific murders happening, and people are, protecting themselves in all sorts of different ways and, moving into like gated areas with guards and, so, and, the murder and the death and it's quite visceral because they don't, in the Caribbean, they tend to, use a lot of photography in their newspapers, and they put everything. So I was kind of amazed how people were really praying, no matter what race, what class, what everybody was praying, and alongside that, using, their blue soap whenever and all that. So my concerns really lay in understanding how people could still put, their confidence in such rituals as a way of stemming the flow, despite the fact that the death rate, of our especially our young men, we're losing like a generation of young Black men in Trinidad, and I think it's the same in Jamaica. To these, because
world, I think,
because the governments are really ineffective, and they're not paying attention to it, and so people in the act of survival, a lot of subcultures are developing, and we have a lot. The drug turf wars are bad, and this is where we're losing this generation of young men, and I really wanted to open up a conversation about this. We need to start looking elsewhere. We need to start talking about this. We just can't begin to accept it as an everyday part of life. So Blue Power really kind of aims to do that, and shows that, at the end of the day, people are going to try to find a better life, and they will risk anything to do it. So I'm using a lot of, I blend a lot of mythological and historical material you know, with the wood and soap, because I'm playing with the history and political aspects of it, and creating other subtexts, you know. So
yeah, I mean, what I find kind of really fascinating about that is that you've come back into it, and you have just you've seen all of the fear surrounding you. So all of that praying here, pray now, use this, do that, to protect yourself is a really massive expression of fear, isn't it? Of collective fear.
Yeah.
And it's I suppose them sort of bringing down those roots of Catholicism and the colonial gift of Christianity, which is also kind of powerless, you know, and disempowering, you know. Absolutely kind of fascinating again, of that bringing them all together and going, this is all so complex, and I'm not going to work it out for you. We just have to kind of, but it creates real strength, doesn't it? You know, to say we have to look at this from the economic injustice of it all that is perpetuating this level of death and trauma in this new generation of young black men and black people.
Yeah, that's right.
Fantastic stuff. Okay. So Jess, back to you.
Back to me. You've been obviously working on this show during lockdown, and you've created all of your works predominantly at home, and I wanted to talk about the new challenges and how you found creating in your domestic space rather than in the studio.
Yeah. Well, I think I've you know, become accustomed actually to working in my domestic space. I tend to be the only one in my studio. A lot of the artists in my studios actually use their studios like you know, just places to store their work, because, you know, I guess that's what happens after you do so many exhibitions. You have nowhere to store the work, you know. So I tend to be in my studio a lot by myself. So, which I actually don't mind, because I go for very, you know, short, intense periods, you know, at least 3 or 4 times a week. So I don't mind when I go in that I'm just working, you know. But what has been happening to me is that, you know, I've been working a lot with domestic materials. So for instance, with the sugar houses, you know, I had to boil like big pots of sugar. And obviously I couldn't do that in my studio. So I had to bring the work home. So I started, you know, that the project for Precariat was I started it in the spring. So I worked through that, you know, the whole of spring here at home. And I sort of like that I'm using domestic materials. I'm doing it in my domestic space, and it's this whole politicization of the work in the domestic space, you know, that's interesting. And as a mother and a wife, I'm able to sort of blend everything together. I literally take over the house when I'm getting ready for an exhibition. You know, I have a lot of oilcloth everywhere. You know, I have my molds everywhere. The dining room becomes a complete mess. Often we have nowhere to eat. So yeah, but I've got accustomed to it, and 2 years ago we decided to build a little studio in the back of the house. Because I'm locked in my studio most winters, I'm really kind of ready to get out in the spring, and just to be outdoors. So we built a little studio in the back, and you know, it's becoming more and more useful, obviously, now with COVID. So I've really got accustomed to working at home, and blending. You know, as I was saying to someone, it's nice that I can get up in the morning and boil a pot of sugar, put it in the cast, wait for it to dry, and then I can go and take the clothes out of the dryer fold them while I'm waiting for the cars to dry, I can do my housework in between. So yeah, I have actually been enjoying being at home, and with COVID, for the first time, this exhibition, I've had assistants, and so that was nice having that camaraderie. And when COVID came last year, we just had to close everything down where we were working, and everything came home. But luckily for me, I had got to the point of beading, so I was able to do that at home as well. And I had done all the heavy work in the in all of the different workshops I was working in. So it was nice to just have that downtime, and the beading is quite repetitive as well as the boat making. So yeah, I kind of enjoyed that a bit. I didn't have to get up every morning and rush to, downtown to the workshop, and so it hasn't been bad at all.
Because your materials, like you just said, sugar, soap beads, Hessian sack, they all speak to the domestic, but they also speak to the history of exports from the Caribbean, and are inseparable from the legacies of slavery and colonialism.
Mm-hmm.
How do you choose your materials, and how do they shape the artwork?
Yeah. Well, I always start with a intense period of research. I either go into an archive, or just let's sit with lots and lots of reading about the subject that I'm interested in, and I do that, I think, alongside a material I might have, like for instance the blue soap. I think that blue soap must have been sitting in my studio for such a long time. And it really evolved again from Alice Yard. So when I came back, I just went to the Caribbean market and I bought some and I put it in the studio, as if to say, okay, speak to me, So like for AntiA Woman, as I was saying, happened when I was at Lewisham. But when I was just about to deinstall as well, I met up with another curator that I knew in London. And I was saying to her, I really would like to take these little sugar houses and go down to the Thames and just put them in the Thames and let them drift and melt away. It just felt the thing to do. And then she suggested, why don't I go down to the Docklands, where the London Docklands Museum is, because that used to be the West India docks. And then she sent me this photograph, and the photograph was called Blood Alley. So Blood Alley was really where the Docklands are now. As I said, it was called West India Docks, and the ships came there, and then the stevedores would throw the heavy sacks of sugar over their backs and walk up this little alley to the warehouse and put the sacks of sugar in. But by the end of the day, their backs would be bleeding because of the Hessian, And this picture that she sent me with the stevedores everywhere, but they also had carts, but from one building to the next had these lines, and hanging from the lines were the sacks. So they'd obviously emptied the sugar, and they were washing them. Maybe they also had blood on them. So from the backs of the stevedores, I don't know. So this image just sort of stayed with me, of this alley with these stevedores and these hanging sacks. And that really captured my imagination. So when I started doing the research for the exhibition, and I realized how resilient these women were, the sack for me, contains so many metaphors for the project. Hessian is a historical material known for its resilience and its durability. It's synonymous with the woman, the uterus, the sac. it also is one of the oldest vessels for carrying commodities, and it immediately began to hold all these metaphors, how they commodified the woman's wombs. So it just became pretty obvious early that was the form I was going to use to express this and the language, but the language needed to be developed because basically it's just a rectangle, So I had the durability and the resilience, but then I needed to develop that language, and it was only when I really started to brand them, because I started off first by just screen printing the wombs on, and even though that was powerful, it was when I started to brand them that the language really developed into this very complex thing, and then I use like animal suture thread to stitch them, and I really like Kader AntiA's work, and he works a lot with repair, and I actually wanted to stand in solidarity with him because I am passionate that reparations are necessary. Starting with an apology, for this ultimate travesty on human dignity. So the animal suture thread really references the dehumanization of the enslaved, and it calls for an act of reparation, and that's something that I really feel strong about. And then I started stitching, the whole thing of stitching, I don't know, that was just a need. For some reason, I just felt that I needed to stitch. I never did it before. And so it was something that I had to learn, so that was a big learning process for me, the whole thing of sewing and it was really enjoyable. I just totally enjoyed it. So the wall hanging, it's also made in the spirit of the resistance of the enslaved woman, and how they would so on the plantations you found that there was something called rival geographies, and this is a term that was coined by Edward Said because there was always such a large percentage of slaves on any one plantation as opposed to how many white people there were. It was really critical for them to control the slaves. So control was a big part of the plantation geography. And so they had areas that they could go. They were demarcated with, of course, probably like barbed wire and so on, fencing. The men had passes to go from like one plantation to the other, because the men had to, some of them had to drive like the carts and so on to take the sugar, the cane to other places. But the women were very contained. And so you found that, they had to find ways around this rival geography to get out, to have their own little parties, to find time to fall in love, to dance, to enjoy their own bodies. It was so critical for them. And of course, I don't know, people in the Caribbean, we love to dance and party, and I think the Africans brought that with them. And so the women, actually, they would steal cotton. They would have to spin cotton for their masters, but they would steal the cotton while they were spinning. And then they would take the cotton and they would dye them. And this was a lot in the south of America. And indigo was a big part of some plantations as well. They had to grow indigo. So they would actually spin the cotton, steal the cotton, make their little dresses, dye them in the indigo. And a lot of them actually made their own shoes as well. So there's one testimony from this woman. And she says, I make my little dress and I dye it yellow. And I make the little shoes too. And they was yellow too, but it hurt my foot. So So there's a testimony in somewhere that I read. So it was really interesting to see and to learn how they found a way, no matter how much they tried to contain them. They found a way to dance, to fall in love, to have their parties. They cooked. They prepared long in advance for these little parties. And it was a great risk, because if they were found, they would have severe repercussions. Like they would beat the men, they would rape the women, things like that. So it was a great risk, but they still did it. So it was really important to me as well to sort of follow that process, of the way that they resisted. So instead of using like old, Hessian sacks from coffee or whatever, I decided that I would make my own sacks, So I bought some of them because texture also became quite critical. And if you go to the shop all the time, you kind of get the same texture. So I did buy some of my sacks from like McLean, and then I cut them apart and I used the Hessian, to make my own sacks, and then I brought them home and I dyed them, following in their footsteps. I actually yes, kind of experience.
Lovely,
yeah. So I dyed them like in tea, coffee. Again, very domestic materials. And then I took them back to the studio, and then I would screen print them or to the allotment and brand them or whatever. So it was really important for me to follow their footsteps, through the whole process. And the whole thing of stitching them with my hand. I stitched the sacks with a sewing machine, but then I stitched all the suture thread with my hand and so on. So that was important. And then I was really influenced again by Alice Walker. Alice Walker, she wrote Everyday Use. So I read quite a few essays, and that really influenced how I made the work and putting it together as this almost like in a quilt-like fashion. And what was important about those essays that I read is that, those quilts that they made in the South of America, they were ready made. They were utilitarian. They had to sleep on them. They had to make them because they had nothing to sleep on and they were cold, So what was nice as well is that they used, all these old materials, like their great-grandmothers, their great-great-grandmothers, their sons who died or whatever. And they used all these old materials to sort of carry on their heritage. They were also heritage pieces, as well as utilitarian. But the women used them to escape the patriarchy that was so prevalent and create their own identities, as well as in the process of preserving their heritage. And that is so evident today from the Gee's Bend women, They are famous now, aren't they? They certainly have created their own identities, So I think that those were all the things that were influencing me as I was making. And I tried to stay very close to their own experiences and their own methods of resistance,
I love the sense that resistance that you're describing is actually a determination to find joy and to the joy, and not allowing that to be taken away, that very sort of fundamental
human spirit, absolutely, and that's what I found.
Forward. I said that I feel so much to bring forward, so the story that you're telling, to empower young women today with a sense of, you know, this is something that can never be taken from you.
No, exactly. And I think that is what is critical in terms of how the history of it was written before. Because, you know, you never hear these stories, you know, when you look at the history of slavery in the normal history books, it's like everybody is one, you know, and the woman, and the women their experience is so different, you know, and it's really important for us to bring that out now, because you know, every other woman is being celebrated, and this amazing woman, her history has been so occluded. And as you said, I think it really does give a lot of inspiration to our young women today. And the Caribbean, if you look at the Caribbean, I mean, we are certainly a matriarchal society.
Yes.
And our women are far surpassing the men. And, you know, it obviously stems from, you know, the all of this resistance and the role models that they have had.
Yeah, I mean, I think you can see that in the kind of first and second and perhaps third generation that are here now. But I do have fear for this much younger generation of young women whom that seems to be getting lost somewhere along the line.
Right.
And they're becoming more, there's, you know, a prevalence of, you know, girls' connections to gangs and how they are being kind of part of that, you know. But I think it's much more recent. As I say, it's the most recent generation. So that's really interesting. I want to bring lots of very young women to see your work.
Yeah, you will have to. We'll have to.
That's what we need to do. That's what we need to do. Sorry, Jess, I said I would try not to talk too much. But
no, not talking too much, Vinky. And it leads perfectly into the next question that we have about women's bodies still exist as a site of resistance and are often controlled by others. How does this work speak to the current condition of women's bodies?
Well, my first thoughts when you sent that question, my first thoughts were with the women in Congo, you know, and especially the ones who have made their way to the City of Joy. So I don't know if you know about the City of Joy.
No.
This was founded by Christine Schuler Deschriver and Dr. Dennis Mukwege, who won the Nobel Peace Prize 2 years ago, and Eve Ensler. So what's happening in the Congo, it's a transformational leadership community for women survivors of violence, located in Bukavu, which is the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo. And it opened in June 2011. There's a great film on Netflix about it, which I watched about 2 years ago when I was doing project. And it's really about healing women from their past trauma, many of which have experienced unimaginable sexual violence. So the City of Joy really provides therapy and life skills and healing, lots and lots of healing for them. And they don't actually leave the City of Joy until they are ready to go back into their communities. So Dr. Mukwege, he's the one that really kind of stitches them back up together again, you know, because it really is horrendous what they are going through. And so that for me gives me a lot of hope that, you know, there are such great places out there, and women are still fighting for control of their bodies, but they're still, you know, able to resist even terrible things like that, and to find a way to support each other, because it's all woman based really. They have very few men in the City of Joy, and the other place that it takes me to is the United States of America, really, where they're beginning to roll back a lot of laws on abortion, and especially the Roe and Wade law, where the Constitution protects a woman's right to have an abortion. So only about 2 weeks ago in Texas, they rolled back quite a bit of laws on abortion, and they are seeking now to, incriminate anybody that is connected with the abortion. So if I drive you to the abortion clinic, they want to, I'll be charged, the receptionist that allows you into the building, or, which is really kind of ridiculous. And I think that if they are able to reverse the Roe and Wade, it's going to take us back centuries. Yeah, it's going to take them back centuries. And, once again, women would be in dark alleys seeking abortions, and we're going to have a lot of unnecessary deaths. So it really erodes our decision about what we do with our bodies. And so the work is really an inspiration to us today, that we can fight back, as you were saying. If enslaved women could find a way to do it, certainly we could find a way to do it in the 21st century, right?
Yeah.
So, I'm hoping that the work sits out there as an inspiration to other women, that they can also take control and find a way, because once the state has control over your body, I don't know, to me that's too archaic. I can't.
It's difficult to even process the
effects of that.
Yeah, the actuality of that. But I love that you are lighting, or you are helping people to identify that small flame inside of them. And I think it doesn't matter how small the flame is, but this is a call to look for it and to find it. It's,
absolutely.
To talk about the other piece, Blue Power, a little more. You mentioned earlier that you referenced folklore, superstition, and other religious practices invoked in the Caribbean for the purposes of protection against evil. And I wondered more widely, how does folklore influence your work?
Yeah, I think it's it's really beginning to influence my work more and more, especially through the materials. For this exhibition, I used something like about 480 cakes of soap. It's a carbolic soap, as I said before. But nowadays, even though it was brought as a disinfectant, nowadays in the Caribbean, it's used for every ill or negativity. So if, as I said, if anything is going wrong with your life, everybody and people from all races and classes, it's just part of our language, really. If you get up in the morning, you have a tummy ache, you go down the road, you run into a man, you have an accident, whatever, at the end of the day, you've just had such a bad day, you'd ring up and sort of be talking to your girlfriend about it, and she said, girl, you better bathe in blue soap, So it's really part of our language, and and it's seeping in more and more. I've also used a character from our carnival. So carnival really started when the French were invited, after the Haitian Revolution, the French were invited to Trinidad. There was something called a cédule de population, and the Trinidad did not have such a big slave community, and we needed people to come with slaves, and so they offered the French people from Haiti and Guadeloupe and so on after the revolution, Haitian Revolution, they offered them land, and the more slaves they brought, the more land they gave them. to come to Trinidad. So that's actually how our slave society developed, and developed really quickly, because a lot of the French plantation owners were scared after the Haitian Revolution.
Yeah.
And they opted to come to Trinidad. So the French came and they brought Carnival, or I think it was called there was Corn Boulet at the time. And before Lent, they would always have a masquerade where they would dress up and use these masks and so on. And but the slaves weren't allowed to partake because it was like a really, high fashion kind of thing. I guess something similar to probably what happens in Venice.
Okay.
Yeah. So, but then the slaves now, again, with their own little ways of resisting, they would have their own little thing outside, and they would they liked the idea of the mask, I guess. And I got interested in that, actually. What happens when you put a mask on? Your identity again is lost, and you can then do anything, can't you? So they would take the molasses, which was a byproduct, was like a waste product in those days, and they would actually cover themselves in the molasses and have a little dance. You know what I mean? But they would mimic. The plantation owners. So today we still have our carnival starts like on the Sunday night when they have the King and the Queen competition in the Savannah in Trinidad, which is a big stage, and then we would go to like parties, and then like 3:00 in the morning we would leave the party and we'd go out onto the street. So this is called Juve, which is French for morning. So this is our Juve celebration, and yeah, we cover ourselves, in blue, and they use the same blue that I used for the Blue Devil. It's a little cube that we used to use to put in our clothes to make them white. You remember Riquette's blue?
Yeah.
Right.
I see it in my mind's eye, yeah.
Yes. So as a child, when I was helping mom to wash the clothes, we put the Riquette's blue. And so in the morning for our Juve, we have something called the Blue Devil. So the Blue Devil comes out, and it's a whole, they have a whole, it's like a gang of them. And it's a creature, a character actually that I was so afraid of as a child, because often we would go to the seaside for carnival, and then the Blue Devils would come to the house with their forks, and they're so scary. Oh my God, I was always so scared of them, and they would dance, and they would, but they're dancing for money. They want you to pay them to leave them. So they actually take the Riquette's blue, they crunch it. Well, I actually grated mine, and then we mix it like in a sort of in cream, and cover themselves so that nobody knows who they are. And they have little horns, and they might even put a horn on their chin, and they go out with their forks and they dance and they scare you, but they're so dirty as well. You don't want them to touch you. So, you often, and you're supposed to throw the money on the ground. You're not supposed to give it to them. You throw it on the ground for them. So in Blue Power, I did a huge Blue Devil, and he really, so I'm really kind of questioning, have we become like a society where we are just paying the devil, and we don't want to touch the issues, you know what I mean? So he represents the capitalism and the fight between good and evil, but also the capitalist governments that are not paying attention, and are we just paying the devil and not dealing with the issues, So yeah, whole thing of mythology and folklore, which is so much a part of the Caribbean life. Yeah, it's interesting actually how it's just seeping into my work, and it isn't necessarily conscious at times.
I think it's also kind of a time when you're investigating ancestry, and we're looking for explanation and powers which we are not going to find in the world, which has now kind of revealed itself to be completely irrational and broken. So
yeah.
I think lots of people are kind of seeking other forms of intelligence or other systems of intelligence to come through. But yeah, that's interesting about putting everyone in the picture to find their own place of denial. In that, just take it away. Just take away the bad stuff, because we can't. Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah, amazing.
Yeah,
amazing. I can't wait to be up close and personal with it.
Oh yeah, I think that I think that the gallery has done such a great job, the technicians and so on. I was really applauding them and saying that we did take some time to install the work, because it really is two massive exhibitions. And the work was actually made for Warsaw Art Gallery, but they haven't opened yet. So I did ask Rock to take it on, because I just felt that it's so critical for the moment. So they've done a fantastic job, because we had to tweak it to fit into their gallery, but it works, and I think you'll be pleasantly surprised.